Kedves kollégát, dear colleagues, the clock's already started and I haven't. I wish to rename my presentation. The question I put to you is, what's in the bag? And for me, what's in the bag for Europe? You all have paper bags. What are you taking away from this event? What is Europe taking away from this event? I'm here to represent Europa Nostra, and Europa Nostra is a large organisation in terms of the community that are members, supporters, all of those people who feel some sort of passion about what Europe means for them. So that's why the bag is so important. Not only what are you taking away, but what can Europe take away from this event? That question has been raised ever since European capitals of culture were created. And we keep asking this question. This particular document was initiated by, at the time, Commissioner Navracic, and it was an attempt to try to look back over 30 years of what was the impact at the time and what is the lasting impact of European capitals of culture. There are surprisingly few comparative assessments about the lasting impact. Not only what is the USP, the unique selling proposition, or what is unique about Veszprém-Balaton, but what is unique about the programme, and how does that create something that has a lasting benefit? If I may mention pitch, it came earlier. There was a study done. One of the things that interested me from that analysis, that evaluation, was the proposal of a knowledge transfer programme. In other words, in the context of today, if we have an event that's not a closing event, a sign-off saying thank you very much and goodbye, but what do we do next? Then that question is relevant not just for us here today, now, and the challenge of shining for Veszprém-Balaton, but how we connect, how we almost have a constellation of illumination that lasts beyond all of our programmes that are involved in the European capitals of culture. So I tried to search for something where these key words such as legacy are being used, this search for a legacy. And I thought particularly in Hungary. Is there an example of something that many years after a cultural event, it still resonates, not just through the records, but in the very language, the very essence of what is Hungary? And when I first came to Hungary over 30 years ago, the first Hungarian language that I was given was hot harom, which is quite amazing because in one phrase, 2 words, I learned literacy, numeracy, and the Hungarian perception of the British. That's quite a lot for 2 words. But it struck me that that, in a sense, is a legacy. It's a memory. But it didn't stop there, because you can still buy the beer. But you cannot buy a 3-6 beer in Britain. I wonder why. It's the same event, it's the same cultural experience, but is that a legacy? Is that something that just resonates in memory? Or is it going beyond that? Is that what we want for Veszprém-Balaton? A beer that 30 years later we say, oh yeah, I was there. Or do you want it to be more than that? Something that is living? That to me seems to be the message of this conference. So what I want to do in this short presentation is leave you with 2 thoughts. The first of which is about perceptions and values. And this illustration shows that one particular subject can have very different perceptions, and people will argue fiercely that they have the correct perception of the subject. They cannot see that there is another angle, another way of seeing the same subject. So when you are thinking about the future of Veszprém-Balaton, or indeed the other European capitals of culture, don't just think about it in terms of why it was set up, what its objectives were, the measurables, the KPIs. Think about how it was seen by other audiences and is still being seen by other audiences. And one of the most famous examples of this is the vase. Some of you will immediately recognize what it is. For those of you who don't, it's the Rubin vase. And I've included it in this presentation because it symbolizes the relationship between the tangible and the intangible. The whole program that you've been hearing about and perhaps have contributed to in Veszprém-Balaton has not just been about the physical events, the physical improvements, the schemes, but the cultural activities, that part of life that has lifted people's experiences and enjoyments. And that really lies at the heart of what a European capital of culture is about. It's the interface where the tangible and the intangible come together. But I think there's another point that's relevant to be made here, not just about Veszprém-Balaton, which we've heard some discussion about today, but other European capitals of culture. Because the hinterland, the landscape, the rural communities are equally important. And in a sense, it's the sum of the parts that makes the European capital of culture what it is, the dynamic focus of something in common. And it's those relationships which I feel are particularly important here about Veszprém-Balaton, and the very different sort of dynamics that go on around Balaton as well as within Veszprém. But you would think that that was all pretty obvious, something that everyone would recognize, appreciate. But it's surprisingly not the case. In 2015, Europa Nostra led an exercise looking at the relationships between priorities, policy priorities across Europe. And as you can see in the diagram, cultural, social, economic, and environmental, and at the heart, where they all overlap, is sustainable development. And again, you would think, hey, you know, we know this. Really? Well, in the same study, it was revealed that only 6% of agencies were operating transversely across all of those domains. That means that we have an embodied sense of working within our specialism, but not working across boundaries. This, again, to me, is a real characteristic of a European capital of culture, that it's not just one particular discipline or quality or value, but it's ranging across all of those. I've spent a number of years supporting Professor Myslivets and the team in Curseg, because in Curseg the questions are asked that go beyond the conventional, the curriculum, that looking at that sort of sense of the horizon of not only why, but where next. And I think that's an important part for Veszprém-Balaton, looking at not just the next year, but in fact, as you've seen during today, looking even a generation ahead, 2 generations ahead. And to do that, we need to think transversely. We need to see the sum of the parts. We need to leave no one behind. We need to be looking at things differently to when European Capital of Culture was started. Earlier this week in Brussels, the Hungarian representation to the European Commission held a conference looking at cultural heritage, the protection of it. I think in the booklet my title says about protection, but I'm not here to talk about how to do stone repairs. I'm here to question you about how we change perceptions, and then from perceptions, attitudes, which is a state of mind, and then behaviour, which is a change in the way in which we do things. And just to give you a glimpse so that I am saying something about cultural heritage protection, when the UK started recognising the need for a national heritage collection, which in some way was representative of the people of the United Kingdom, they started acquiring sites, but then they started fencing them in because they didn't trust the public to look at them. So you could look at this from outside the fence, but you were absolutely not allowed to engage in your cultural heritage. And then things softened by the 1950s. And for such as Stonehenge, you were allowed to go and look at it, but under supervision. You were not allowed to go by yourself in case you did something naughty. And I have to say, the expressions on the ladies' faces looks to me as though they're up for trouble, up for mischief. But these issues are becoming amplified multifold times from those days, because tourism is not only a global industry, but the whole sense of awareness of cultural heritage and appreciation and a desire to engage is much stronger. But the problem is that if it's unrestrained, we don't have Venice with a railing, a metal fence around it. But when the coronavirus came along, suddenly we realised what the impact, the life support for a place like Venice was. So we have to think transversely, and particularly the way that Europa Nostra is doing this is by setting up with partners the European Heritage Hub. Now, today isn't about the detail of that. It's the principle that bring people together from different backgrounds and different priorities, share not only the experiences, but the visions, and you start to see a bigger picture about where you fit within the world. And so for the European Heritage Hub, it's a relationship with the European Commission, looking at Europe as a continent and the values that drive cultural heritage, not just as something to preserve, but as a way of life. And within that landscape lies the European capitals of culture, which have a purpose. And if we look at them not only in terms of the applications and what we want to achieve while they are capitals of culture in terms of programming, but in a sense, Veszprém-Balaton doesn't stop being a European capital of culture. It continues. We're not looking back on being a European capital of culture. We're looking at how that, not just a legacy, a memory, but we're looking at how it can continue to reinvest to be a sustainable investment in people's lives. I went back to Glasgow just recently, which was a capital of culture 30 years ago. Look at the banner, People Make Glasgow. It's not a statement that is out of date. What it's saying is that it's a dynamic. People are making Glasgow. There will not be a time when they are not doing that. And so, looking forwards, through Europa Nostra, I've been involved in Skopje, in North Macedonia, and the Central Post Office through the 7 Most Endangered programme. Again, we need to be thinking in that bigger context. So very briefly, let's think about what's in your bag as you leave this conference. And for us, next month, we have the European Summit, Cultural Heritage Summit. So we're thinking each year, looking back, looking forward. And I want to close with just a couple of slides, one of which is about how we recognise achievement. And last year, we were celebrating an award for Budapest 100, which is about ordinary people opening up ordinary homes and recognising that heritage is not just high level, it's at every level. And it's not just their home, but it's the story. And you may have come across these more and more, certainly around Budapest, but actually further afield as well. The Kolodor mini Szobrok, which really shrink what European cultural heritage is, right down to the fingertips. That can be the Europe that you know, but I always like this quote from Peter Esterházy. I'll give you just a couple of seconds to read it, because the whole point is that Europe is not just a place, but it's about who you are, where you are, when you're there. And that can change even if you don't move. So thank you for listening, if you have been, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.